Welcome to another episode of The Conversation here on the Dakotan. This is part of the Dakotan's election central coverage of the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. I'm Jonathan Starr, and today I am joined by Trygve Hammer. Thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Absolutely. Before we jump into the world of politics and everything that's going to be crazy about that, let's just introduce you. Talk about you for a minute. Who are you? How'd you get your roots in North Dakota? Obviously, you're from Velva. You were raised there. Just talk about that for a minute.
Well, I've said that if I'm successful in this campaign, the one thing that will happen is that everybody in North Dakota will see the name Trygve in print and be able to pronounce it.
Yeah.
I got that name. I was born here and mined at Trinity Hospital.
Right.
I was scrawny. My dad said I looked like a freshly hatched baby robin.
Man.
My grandmothers were saying, baptize him before he dies, baptize him before he dies. And my grandfather on my mom's side said, take him home, name him Trygve, he'll be fine. So that's what they did. And I grew up in Velva. I mean, I just have so many fond memories of that town and feel so connected to it. And it was a great place to go to school. And when I finished school, I just didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And I joined the Navy and ended up nuclear power Navy. Went from there to the Naval Academy. Decided to go Marine Corps. Like I've said many times, it's based on that ethos of officers eat last, which really rang true with me, and I really like the physicality of the Marine Corps. I mean, I can't believe you go somewhere and you get paid to run obstacle courses and stuff. Yeah. That was great.
Right.
Did a couple tours as a helicopter pilot and as a forward air controller. I got out 2001, the summer of 2001. We weren't flying much out in Hawaii then. That was a hardship tour, flying helicopters in Hawaii.
Yeah, very
we weren't flying much at the time and really never did. It felt like we were never going to do the mission. It was always just going to be training and minimum hours every month. So I got into the airlines.
Okay.
And I did that for a while. I left to go live in Rome.
Wow.
And then I left to go to Iraq, and it just got to be too much back and forth. So I kind of canned that career. I worked at a defense contractor for a while and did some other security work, and then got divorced, came back here in 2016 and taught science out in Granville for 3 years, which is sort of like being in combat in Iraq sometimes. And
I'm sure.
But I enjoyed it. You get the second paycheck, both as a Marine and as a teacher. As a Marine, you get the second paycheck is you're a Marine.
Right.
As a teacher, it's when you're walking around out in town and you hear that kid get all excited, say, Absolutely. Mr. Hammer, really excited to see you. And it just really, and when you see them doing well too, when you meet them and they're doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if I read correctly, you were in the reserves when 9/11 happened, correct?
Yep.
So your name then ended up getting called where you had to go to Iraq?
Right. And I had already associated myself with a unit in Memphis with an infantry unit. I knew we'd be going somewhere sometime. And that was the closest to where, my ex was active duty Navy too. So I was a military spouse at the time, as well as being a reservist. So,
wow.
So we were there in Memphis, and that's the unit I went with to Iraq. And it was great. It was fantastic.
After all that traveling, seeing the world from a unique perspective, what brought you back to North Dakota?
I got divorced, and once again I was sort of like out of high school. What am I going to do? And you just go to ground. You go to the place the place where you have family. This North Dakota will always feel like home to me. I was never one of those kids who's like, I got to get out of North Dakota. But then I ended up being one of those kids who got out of North Dakota.
Yeah, right. It's interesting. A lot of the people that I've talked to, they have a story that brought them out of North Dakota, and then there came a point in their life where like, we've got to get back to North Dakota. And whether it's the pace of life, the integrity of the people here, whatever it is, it seems like there's something that draws people out back and gets them connected.
Yeah, and it's that connection. You feel connected to the people, and there's a connection with the land, and I can't even explain it. I'm an upland game hunter. I like to go out and hunt birds, and I just always love the fall, especially around here, and just the smell and I just love it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great time to golf too.
Yeah, I don't do that.
You don't do that? Oh man.
Well, I can do that very badly.
Yeah, me too. But I try. What was the thing that prompted you to get into politics?
I sort of fell into politics the same way I fell into the Navy, and then I chose more when I went Marine Corps. I came back here and I went to a Democratic district meeting, and I I walked out of that meeting as the chairman.
Oh, man.
So then in 2020, I was the chairman. We had 2 candidates, and we needed 3. So, I jumped on that grenade. I was the 3rd candidate.
Yeah.
Then 2022, I was not, my district didn't have a race.
Okay.
I was not planning on running for anything, but I got a call about a month, maybe even less, before the convention asking me to run for PSC, and I agreed to do it.
Yeah.
So, there was that, and then got into it, and like I said, Katrina Christensen and I both said we would come back and be on the ticket the next time, and here we are.
Yeah, and it seemed like for the PSC, or the Public Service Commission, it was a pretty successful race for not having a high name ID, I would assume at the time, just getting back, or you'd been settled in the state, but it was a pretty successful race. Did you feel that way? It seemed like, from what I've seen, there was a lot of great feedback that you had received from that.
Well, I got more votes than any other Democrat in the state that cycle. I raised hardly any money.
Yeah.
And the thing that happened after that is I'd be going around the state working, and I would run into people, and they're like, "Oh, you were on the ballot?"
Wow.
And they're like, "Well, I would have voted for you," but they hadn't heard my story. They had voted. They'd actually had to have seen my name on the ballot, but they had no idea. Yeah. So that's why, I'll be going home and making those phone calls, because we have to have the money to advertise and get my story out there and get known. And opportunities like this are great, but it's just the the earned media doesn't get out as much as the paid media. You need to advertise.
Absolutely. Agree with you there. You mentioned that the leadership role in your district kind of fell into your lap, and I know that you've already mentioned on here, but if you do much research on Trygve, you know that he's going to mention officers eat last. That's an ethos that you live by. How have you seen that implemented in your leadership style as you've worked with people?
Well, as I've worked, I've always just, I've always kind of felt like I'm the last, like everybody else is going to be served, and if I'm a leader, I'm actually serving the people under me. I should be the most replaceable person.
Right.
A lot of people get into politics and they get the attention. They get elected somewhere. They feel like they have a mandate and that they're in that position because they're somehow special.
Right.
But that's not really it. You have to honor the institution and revere it. But you have to know that, you're an employee of the people who voted for you.
It seems like that in Washington right now, there's a little bit of entitlement. Perhaps, and I that's a general statement, so that's grouping people that don't feel that way. But it feels like there's definitely some tug between the people right now saying, hey, we feel like we're not being heard and things like that. So it's definitely nice to hear that there's actually a leader that's interested in realizing I'm not going there for my interests, I'm going there for the interests of the people and being able to run on that.
Well, it actually looks bad for the Congress that so many people have gone there, and they sometimes weren't wealthy when they got there, but now they're still in the Congress and they're very wealthy.
Right, yeah.
How did that happen? And when you start to look at the ethical side of it, as the stock trades and stuff they can make, it just doesn't look good, and it erodes public trust.
Yeah, it's a great point. So talking about North Dakota politics for a moment, last Democrat in either a governor, so statewide position, or a federal legislative position, so either our state representative or one of our 2 senators, was 2018 Heidi Heitkamp, and she lost that 2018 race to, I believe it was Kevin Kramer. And for some people in their voting history, all they've ever seen are Republicans in the state, right? Though 2018 is not that old. And if you go and you look before 2018, Heidi Heitkamp was the end of a lot of blue that was, I believe it was Kent Conrad, that was before her. That was all the way back to 92 that he had been in position. So it was really a turn that the state took as a whole from the roots of being in the Democratic blue. Why do you feel that happened? Was it a change of philosophy in the state? Or is it something deeper than that?
I think it's a couple things, and I've mentioned it before. Well, one thing, Byron Dorgan, Kent Conrad, Heidi Heitkamp, they're good at what they do. Yeah. Heidi is really good at retail politics. As bad as Ron DeSantis is at it,
Right.
She is good at it, and I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is you started to get the media messaging, and you had a lot of right-wing radio out there, and we never had an answer for it. We didn't bring up anything on the other side. So that was a lot of what they hear. And when I talk to Democrats from other parts of the country, they don't understand how big radio is out here. You're out in the tractor and the combine, you can listen to the radio, and they listen to this every day. And we thought it was silly. A lot of it was, but we never countered it. Mm-hmm. And I think that has been a big problem. And then the other thing is, so we lost those talented people. They're out of politics now, and we just did not give people a palatable option or work hard enough. That's basically what I think it is when it comes right down to it, we didn't work hard enough. We had to get out there and do the work. And that's my whole campaign. I'm like, hey, we're the steel-toe boots, hard hat, lunch pail kind of campaign. We're going to work every day, make those calls, knock those doors, get out and talk to people.
Absolutely. So what you mentioned, hard work is going to be a key thing to get it back onto that track that it was on. What are some other things? You've mentioned people getting more name ID, running in sequential elections and stuff like that. What are some of the other key things that you think to get it back onto that track?
Well, a really key thing, and if Republicans aren't worried about the Hammer for Congress campaign, but they should be worried about the Hammer influence here in Minot with Souris River Dems and how hard we've been working. We used to have meetings where it was regular to have just 4 or 5 people there, and now we're getting over 20 to our regular meetings.
That's awesome.
So, and we've been reaching out, we've been sending mailers, making phone calls, and we're doing the same kind of hard work you got to do in the campaign, and we're organizing at the local level, and
that's important.
And the funny thing is you call someone and they're like, "Oh, you're a Democrat?" And it's like this kumbaya moment, and they're so happy to hear from you because they've been hiding, and I really hate that.
Right. Yep. That is hard. Let's go to the other side of the tracks. Yeah, I'm trying to get as many train jokes in here. I don't know if you're catching them, but let's go to the other side of the tracks for a moment. The Republican Party has undergone a ton of transition this year. Middle to end of last year, for the last couple years, there's been substantial in-party fights that it seems like perhaps maybe it's a little bit more than normal. And then middle to end of last year, there was a decent change that happened when their chair was replaced. Perry Schaefer was no longer the chair. He was replaced by Sandy Sanford. First off, do you feel like this almost in-party fighting that is happening in the Republican Party, do you feel like that's just natural politics, or is this something that Republicans should be concerned about?
I'm not really sure. I can tell you that when I got into this race and I was doing interviews out those first couple of days, and they talked about Armstrong, I'm like, hey, we don't even know that we're going to be facing Armstrong.
Right. You're right.
And there was always this idea that if Burgum decided not to run for governor, Armstrong was the heir apparent.
Yeah.
And I have talked to a lot of Republicans here in Minot who don't like that.
Wow.
I think, and now we see everybody getting out of Armstrong's way, of course.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So he'll be the candidate. I haven't seen
seen
all the people who were talking about Campbell and Fedorchak were both looking at governor, and then Armstrong said, "I'm going to do it," and they're just okay. We're out of that race.
Yep.
I think the district conventions for the Republicans and the Republican state convention are going to be more colorful than the Democratic conventions by a long shot. There's going to be a lot more angst going on. And I have no idea how it's all going to wash out. And I don't think that's as damaging to the Republican Party right now as some of the bad behavior from state legislators.
Okay.
That thing with the Attorney General Wayne Stenjum's emails all getting deleted, that doesn't happen in a good ethical environment.
Right.
If you have a good ethical environment, the IT person says, wait a minute, but when you don't, then it doesn't even occur to them. And it's not the IT person's fault. He was asked to do it and did what he thought was his job or her job. I don't even know who did that, but there's that. Then there's the I can't remember his name now, the Nico Rios thing out there. And the problem with that wasn't so much the drunk driving even, which is bad, but it was the arrogance. Yeah. And I need to call Drew Wrigley. I bet you Drew Wrigley hated that,
Right. That's not what you want.
And they're trying to give the business card and all that. Right. And then, of course, there was the anti-immigrant stuff, and apparently there was also some homophobic stuff. And, that hurts them as well. And then when one of your state legislator tweets that the Ohio State Legislature should ignore the past initiated measure, ignore the will of the people, well, that tells you how that legislator feels about the will of the people in general.
Right.
So I think some of those things are bigger problems for the Republicans than their own interscene fighting right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely need to be running with a little more ethics there. So you mentioned a little bit with Kelly Armstrong running for governor. A lot of transitioning happening. He's running for governor. You had Campbell, who originally was going to run for governor, switched once he found out about that. It appeared. And then Rick Becker is the other candidate at this point, although his will be an interesting story based off him previously running as an independent. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, which would be, honestly, as I was preparing for this, I was like, I don't know what plan you've put. Obviously, I've heard from other interviews. Right now, we're just focused on getting the true nomination from the Democrats, and that's understood. But if you get that, if that's secured, would it be a beautiful world if there was perhaps an independent, a Republican, and a Democrat in that race?
Well, I mean, yeah, that would help. But the way it's going right now, Becker, he's going to be on the primary ballot. So if he loses there, he's not allowed to run as an independent, if I understand state law correctly. So the fight is going to be in the primary. Campbell, I believe, ran against Armstrong once before, and he petitioned and got on the ballot. So I have a feeling there's going to be one person nominated at the convention. That might be Fedorchak, and maybe the other two get on the primary ballot via signatures. Yeah. So that's how I think it's going to play out, and I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel? Because I don't feel like there's a shoo-in for that position on the Republican side. There's, Armstrong, like that's going to be a strong candidate. It'd be difficult for a Democrat to get the governor position away from Armstrong, I feel. Yeah. But I don't feel that way for the House. I don't feel like there's a strong candidate. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think we're on a pretty level playing field. Yeah. Like I said, they all come in with probably more personal money than I do, and they're connected to the machine. Right. The Burgum machine, the Armstrong machine. They've got the PACs that are out there ready to give to them. So I need to budget, and I need to just keep working hard to bring in that money myself and get out and meet people.
One last question on this, and then we'll get to issues, because this is maybe not the funnest stuff to talk about. But do you think North Dakota is at a point where there is a majority, maybe not a majority, but a substantial number of North Dakotans that just simply vote party line right now?
Yeah, I think there is a good number of that, but I also run into constantly people who talk about the Democrats and the Republicans. They don't identify with either one. A lot of those people either don't vote or they just reflexively vote Republican because those are the names they've heard before. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we're going to need to really turn out voters. Probably we need to turn out voters who haven't voted before. And, I have Republican friends who've told me they're going to vote for me. So I need to make more Republican friends and also get them to vote for me. Right.
Absolutely. So let's jump into the issues. Why you would get Democrats and Republicans to vote for you. What are the key issues that you are campaigning on? Well,
number one, we need to restore democracy. And we need to restore everyone's faith in the entire system. Right. There are some things, it's funny if you look at gerrymandering. After 2010, the Republicans had a huge advantage. 2020, the Democrats did a better job. So now it's pretty much even and not much of a factor. But that's because both sides have a bunch of gerrymandered districts. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who are disenfranchised by that system. We have people who were upset about a slightly underinflated football in an AFC championship game, right. But they'll let this, what I see as cheating, go on in our federal elections.
Right.
So I think we need to work on restoring that. Maybe get some kind of optional national voter ID. Then you'd have a number that could be traced across states, and that would reduce, make it really hard to be a multiple voter anywhere, and it would increase faith in the system. And we have to have the companies that are involved in this stuff. They need to be, checked by Homeland Security and verified. And we need a system that's robust and that people trust, and that doesn't make it exceptionally hard to vote.
Right. Absolutely. So basically restoring faith in democracy, election integrity, something along those lines.
Yep.
What else?
We do need to fix the border.
Okay.
And and it's not just the Mexican border. Actually, we've had fentanyl coming down from Canada going into especially the reservations in Montana. That's a big problem all over. And it's actually, when it comes across from Mexico, it's mostly Americans bringing it across. Now that bill, the aid bill that just passed the Senate, it contains all of the poison pill provisions that the House Republicans put in regarding the border. Well, not all of them, but it contains 90% of what they wanted. So if they vote down this bill, one thing it says is they're not really serious about solving the border or immigration.
Right. And that bill, it passed the Senate. Now it's going to the House.
Yep.
If you were in office, how would you vote on it?
I would vote yes. I believe that we need to help Ukraine defend itself against Putin's army. And in the process, we are going to degrade Putin's military capabilities and his political standing, which I think is really important, because he's a dictator. Maybe we won't say dictator. Let's say he's an authoritarian bully, probably a murderer.
Right.
So with so many people who've fallen out of windows and been poisoned and everything around him. And, he wants, he would take any opportunity he could to hurt us. Yeah. And by investing in Ukraine now and helping them, we're basically leveraging another nation's army to degrade an enemy of the United States. And we're sending a signal, because it's not just about Putin. Xi Jinping is watching. Kim Jong-un is watching. They have their eyes on territory that they want, and they're looking to see if the United States will remain a good ally. Those guys, they would love for us to take a nice isolationist turn, because then they would feel emboldened. And
so you mentioned isolationist, and I feel that with the bill that was passed, there's basically 3 sub-issues that spawn from it. One is spending. Is it important that we prioritize getting a balanced budget over some of these bills, spending bills, whether it's an aid bill to Ukraine or money being spent somewhere else? It seems like we're constantly exceeding our budget and going further into debt. Is it important for America to get that balanced?
Yes, we do need to get back to fiscal balance. Back in the Clinton administration, we had a surplus. Finally, the deficit, there was no deficit. We were actually reducing the debt. But you got to understand that a lot of the debt is held by, say, the Social Security Trust Fund. They hold millions of debt. So when we play these games that, we're not going to make our debt payments, we are actually failing to pay the Social Security Trust Fund. We're failing older Americans when we do that. And also with these games about shutting down the government, what these guys never think of, because they're so detached from regular working people, they don't know about that GS4, GS5 single mom who has rent to pay, child care to pay, all those things. Just the regular people who actually get the work of government done right down on the front line. Right.
It's incredible to think that when the government shuts down, there are armed servicemen and women working for free, and they'll get their back pay eventually. But they have to have the stress of figuring out how, like you just said, they're going to pay for rent during those times, and there's some options that have come up. But still, if there was any other employee, you're going to be like, employer, I'm out.
Yep, and they end up better off than most, because when you're in the military, you have housing. You still have health care. There's still a hospital. You have a DOD school there. And those are actually a good model of what happens when kids have at least one working parent, shelter, plenty of food, well-paid teachers. DoD schools do really well.
Yeah. So we see spending as one. There's some that have proposed the idea that when the budget is at a deficit, that Congress should go without pay until they get it resolved, and then you would see a budget actually resolve to being within and there being a surplus. Do you feel like something like that would be I know it would never happen, essentially. Yeah. I think we could safely say it would never happen. But do you think something like that would be a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it would only really hurt guys like me who don't have a bunch of personal wealth to fall back on,
that's fair.
So that's, they can vote themselves a pay raise, though it can't take effect until the next cycle.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that would hit me in the pocketbook pretty hard.
That would hit you a little differently than Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, exactly.
Great point. Another issue from this aid bill we see is how involved should America be in other wars that are going on around the world that do not directly affect us, though there can be some indirect impacts.
Right. Well, I think when you have, like, Ukraine is a pretty clear good guy, bad guy situation. You have an emerging democracy. It used to be run by Yanukovych, who was a Putin puppet, and he stole millions from the people of Ukraine. So, that one is pretty clear cut. And, Biden was originally got a lot of criticism from Republicans for not giving enough, not getting it there fast enough. And I felt that way too. I mean, I was, I'm a bit of a hawk. I want to go after him.
Yeah.
I saw those, I was Ford Air Controller. I saw those Russian tanks and armored vehicles lined up on that road. I'm like, oh man, give me a couple of F-18s and a radio, and I'm going to destroy the entire Russian army.
Yeah.
But we need to let our allies know that we have their back. And we need to let the world's bullies know that, if you do this, you're going to deal with the consequences.
Right. So obviously not an isolationist approach at all. And I really don't think that's fair. But are you where we should be in every conflict that's going on, where we should be monitoring all of them and seeing how we can affect every conflict, or is it somewhere in the middle? Where do you stand on all that?
Well, it's not every conflict. There are some. Well, let's take Iraq, for example, and Afghanistan too. You go into a place where there's a lot of tribal stuff that you just don't understand.
Right.
We
Absolutely.
did not understand the human terrain in either one of those countries.
Right.
Invading Afghanistan has never been a good idea.
Yeah.
And in Iraq, when I got there, it was mostly in my area. It was, Shias killing Sunnis. Those were the bodies we'd pull out of the river with a bullet in their head.
Yeah.
And, we just did not understand that. And it was kind of the, you broke it, you bought it kind of thing. And we spent so much money and so much in human currency there. We lost so many great Americans in Afghanistan, in the global war on terror, and I think it could have been executed way differently. Mm-hmm. And I kind of look at Israel's response as well. Hamas, they're butchers. What they did was terrible, but you don't want your response to get you all mired in the muck and also create future terrorists, because you are going in and just being too brutal. When we were in Iraq, it was you had to clear between and beyond before you pulled that trigger.
Gotcha.
Of course, the bad guys never have that problem. They can shoot all they want. They hit an innocent. They don't care.
Right.
But it's not courage if you're just putting your rifle to your shoulder and blasting away and you don't care who you hit.
You feel like Israel is a little too aggressive?
I think they have been. I don't like some of the bombing, and you can get in big trouble for criticizing Israel at all, and when you're in the U.S. House of Representatives. But I think militarily they've sometimes a bomb isn't the answer. Sometimes you need some bullets. And the thing about it though, when you do it that way, it's way more dangerous.
Yeah.
But
right. So the third issue that spawns from this aid bill, a sub issue, is that of border security, because obviously you've already mentioned there's some poison pills that the Republicans have inserted into there. I was talking with a candidate in one of the districts in North Dakota who's saying that some of the drugs that they're seeing is from the border. Of course, you've already addressed that also comes from the northern border. He was referring to the southern border. How important is it, or first off, is there a border problem on our southern border that needs to be taken care of? And if your viewpoint is there is, how important is it for us to get that taken care of?
There is a problem, and it is very important for us to get it taken care of. And not all of that is going to be, more Border Patrol agents, which is in this bill, and those kind of physical things. Part of it's going to be the whole system of them wanting to try to get in the United States, because the way it is right now, it's very hard for them to stay in their country and apply for asylum in the United States. If we could make that easier, they're not going to make these big caravans coming up to the border. And those caravans are bad for them and bad for us.
Right.
And, and then you're Border Patrol and you got to go, rescue a family that's caught in razor wire in the Rio Grande or something. That's not great. That's dangerous.
So then our immigration law should be a little more forgiving. It should be a little more easy to come in.
Well, it should be not done at the border. It should be done in that country, and we need to work with those countries to make it easier there. And it's like General Mattis said. Every dollar you don't spend on diplomacy, I need to spend on bullets.
Yeah.
And so there's a softer approach that we can take, and I don't think North Dakotans want any kind of cruelty.
Right.
There's a certain brand of conservatism now that's all about owning the libs. They would go sit on the border in the Rio Grande and get video of the family drowning, and put it out there, to own the libs. But North Dakotans aren't mean spirited like that, and conservative Republican North Dakotans don't like that brand. They don't want to be associated with it.
What happened to politics where it became this rivalry? It moved beyond. It seems like back in the day, probably before my time, it was a little more forgiving. Like, we're trying to work together. We have different viewpoints, but we're trying to get something done. Now, if the senators that voted yes for this aid bill, there's people that are sending out their names saying these are the people that you need to have on a watch list and stuff like that. It's like, at what point, what created this problem?
I think a lot of it is the media environment, social media, rise of the internet, and social media has just been so toxic. And most of the kids now don't bother with Facebook, and a lot of people in my generation. I was off of Facebook for about a year and a half before this. You kind of once you start a campaign, you got to be back on it a little bit, and it feels like maybe it is a little less toxic right now on there. People just got sick of it now. Yeah, Twitter is still a battlefield, but everybody is also in their silos. Their information silos. They are not seeing what the other side is seeing. I listen to like the Daily Wire, and I'll listen to Fox News stories, and just to hear what the other side is hearing. What I notice, it isn't so much what they're hearing as what they're not hearing.
That's what it comes down to.
When I was a kid, I would go to my grandma's house, and I was a big reader. I would read anything, and she would always have a box of like Reader's Digest there for me. And so I would read those things from cover to cover. Like, I would read who's the publisher, all this stuff all the way through. And I read a story in there one time about this immigrant out in California who'd bought land, and now this horrible liberal judge was ruling that he couldn't use that, couldn't have his sheep or cattle or whatever he wanted to have on that land. And I'm like, it's in the that's outrageous section is where it was. And then I heard the same story, same tone on Paul Harvey. And and a little while later, though, I was doing a research paper, and I came across, it was like U.S. News or World Report or something. I came across the real rest of the story, that this guy knew before that, that this land had this endangered species on it, and he couldn't use it for that purpose. And that's why he got it cheaper. And I felt so betrayed. I have not picked up a Reader's Digest since then. And like Paul Harvey, I hear his voice and I just kind of cringe. And sometimes you got to get a little angry at your media, and take a look at other media and find out what's going on. And I also, I also developed this theory then, or this idea that if it sounds outrageous, it's probably, at least part of it is not true.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy to live by. Our country was founded, I think it'd be fair to say this, our country was founded with an understanding of the importance of religion. It included references to God in the Declaration of Independence. Do you think it is important to continue to have that biblical influence on even decisions that are made in our country?
Short answer, no. And in the Declaration of Independence, really, when it refers to, the only reference is to we were all created equal, you know. And I just really hate the idea of theocracy. We see what it's done in Iran, and we've seen some really mean-spirited Christianity here. Once you start mixing politics and religion, it hurts them both. It damages both the church, and it damages our politics. And the last thing you want is a guy who, you know, like I said, I don't want someone who feels entitled to that seat in the House of Representatives being there, feeling like he's somehow special. You get someone there who thinks it's God's will that he's in that seat, that, you know, he's basically has God behind him. That's really dangerous.
Okay. Yeah. There was a line that I read. It was, in some ways, it feels like we have gone from freedom of religion, which is something fair that we should all agree on, to freedom from religion, where there's almost a concerted effort to get that push under the rug a little bit. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like, we could talk issues, and I'm really not wanting to go to apply it because there's the full story, and that we could have a full podcast just on the clashes of those things, right? I'm not trying to bring all those into this. But it feels like in some point America is trending heavily away from religion, and is that a concern?
You know, well, we have seen that, and we have actually seen a lot of people leaving churches. I grew up Lutheran in Velva, and when I grew up there, the two most powerful men in town were Father Carl and Pastor Nissen. You know, those were the two guys. If my dad was once mayor of the town, but he would not have had the power of those two guys.
Wow.
If you see a kid do something wrong and you want him to stop, you'd say, I'm going to tell Father Carl, or I'm going to tell Pastor Nissen.
All right.
And they would stop.
Got my attention.
And we have fallen away from that. But part of that also has been politics intruding into the church. There was one of those big churches down south, and one of those mega churches, and they were chanting, "Let's go, Brandon." Yeah.
All right.
Does that belong in church?
No, it does not.
I don't think so. And I just really feel like most North Dakotans also, their faith is private to them. They have this relationship with God, and frankly, I don't think about my faith that much in policy.
Yeah.
And I would never want someone to be held to a rule that came from my faith only.
Okay. Yeah. There's more that would be fun to talk about that, but I'm gonna force myself to switch gears, and we're gonna come to a close because it's already been about 45 minutes. It's been a good talk. So yeah, flies by when you're having fun.
Yeah.
Two just recent incidents. One was I believe on Sunday, talking about mega churches. There was a shooting at a mega church in Texas, and then today there was the Kansas City Super Bowl parade. And there was a shooting that was nearby that. It didn't seem like it was mass casualty, but there were people injured. Is gun control a problem? Gun's a problem.
Gun culture in this country has become a problem, I think. There's so many people out there who, you probably know someone who concealed carries who you think that's the last guy I think who should have a gun. Right. I've run across that a couple of times. Yeah. I always fired both pistol and rifle. I always fired expert, and I've always been very careful with firearms. And I just when you get these incidents where a toddler gets a hold of a gun, and I'm like, how does that happen, and how do people not get punished when that happens? But there just seems to be this, especially among young men, this kind of culture around it, this kind of once I have the gun, now I'm now I'm like the guy in that movie who can like shoot everybody, and
Gotcha.
it's just it is pretty dangerous. Now I don't think you can't outlaw that kind of culture, but you
Right.
can, I think we need to work partly from the cultural aspect of it.
That's a good response. So rather than going from a legislative aspect, let's work on the culture. Let's work on better training. Let's work on changing how they're used, basically.
Yeah. And you got to have people who understand firearms so say you want to get rid of bump stocks. Well, how about if instead of getting rid of bump stocks, we got rid of like 100-round drums or whatever that crazy thing is because that bump stock is going to make you run out of ammo pretty fast. So if you don't have a large magazine,
Gotcha.
A few rounds in the magazine on a bump stock is just gonna be gone.
Seconds,
It might actually save some people who the shooter was going after.
Right. Makes sense. Well, it's been a great time. If I got 2 questions in closing, and it's basically about the election itself. First off, what makes you qualified for this office, for this position?
Well, I'm qualified for this office because I have a long history of leadership. And I'm qualified for this office because I'm that guy who can't put in thousands of dollars for my race. I'm the only guy who has come back from 2 weeks out on rigs in the Bakken just aching. I'm the only guy who's managed both a classroom and a combat patrol and a helicopter flight. And everywhere I've gone, you see, I walked in, I became district chairman. I'm commandant of the Marine Corps League here in mine, and I'm involved in my community,
Right.
and I care. And I'm not one of those extremist blowhards. I'm not looking to get on YouTube or on Twitter or on TikTok. I'm not looking for that kind of fame. I'm looking to serve, and I really feel like it ought to be a dialogue toward best solutions. And first you get to workable solutions, maybe. Everybody has to compromise, and later on you find that best solution. But it should be a dialogue, not a shouting match.
Absolutely. And to follow that up, if you were to get elected, we always talk about the president's first 100 days in office. Now, I understand it's completely different for a president because he gets to executive order stuff if he so chooses. There's a lot more power that he has. But what are some of the immediate goals that would be on your plate day one that you're trying to work towards?
The first thing would be just, whoever gets elected is going to be a freshman congressman and just have to learn their way around first.
Yep.
But I would go into my caucus and I would be talking, we need a new farm bill, and we need to talk to people from the cities about that. I need to talk to my entire caucus, even those who might not understand rural issues that much.
Mm-hmm.
Got to get out and make those connections across the aisle. And, get a farm bill that has more access to crop insurance and maybe more incentives built into the crop insurance for the things that maybe the USDA wants us to do or to achieve other goals. Instead of just mandating them, you throw in some incentives. So we want to work on those kind of things, those North Dakota specific things, and make sure that, powerful people in the caucus know about them.
Absolutely. Well, if someone's interested in supporting you, what would be their best step?
First thing to do would be to go to hammerfornd.com, and that's hammer like the tool, FORND.com. That's where they can go and donate all their money up to $6,600. That's the maximum.
There you go.
A lesson for everybody. You get $3,300 for the primary, $3,300 for the general. That's the maximum. Something I didn't know until I started in this race.
Right. So go there. You'll be able to learn more about Trygve, and you'll also be able to support the campaign. Well, really appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This has been another episode of The Conversation here on The Dakotan. It is part of The Dakotan's Election Central coverage of the 2024 North Dakota election cycle. You can go to mydakotan.com, click on Election Central, find about a bunch of information on the candidates, see interviews just like the one you are watching right now. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe on YouTube. Become part of the Dakotan community. Thank you, and have a great day.